We are live now.
Oh, great. Okay. So a very warm welcome to today's session at Jindal School of Government and Public Policy at OP Jindal Global University. We have amongst us Professor Priyatosh Sharma and Professor Sridhar Patnaik, who is our registrar, and Professor Sharma is from Chandigarh University. Now I'll hand over the audio to, the mic to Professor Patnaik, who will carry forward and welcome our speaker and introduce and start the session.
Thank you so much, Shivangi. First of all, a warm welcome to our distinguished speaker, Professor Priyatosh Sharma, who is currently working as Chairperson, Department of History, Punjab University, Chandigarh. And it's indeed my great pleasure and privilege to welcome Professor Sharma and all my colleagues from the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy and all the other schools of the university to this public lecture broadly entitled Community Participation in State Formation, Case Study of Punjab. Before I begin to welcome the speaker and the distinguished participants, I must take a moment and an opportunity to express my gratitude to the University Grants Commission on behalf of the OP Jindal Global University for facilitating the lecture and also for coordinating with the speaker this afternoon. This only made our job easier in terms of organizing this lecture. So we are indeed thankful to the UGC for having convened, I understand, a series of lectures. And it also makes us more happier to know that the UGC chose the OP Jindal Global University as one of the universities to host the lectures which UGC is facilitating for the benefit of the larger community. That includes not only students of the OP Jindal Global University, but students of other universities and other educational institutions in and around the country. And given that we are in a position to organize this lecture in a virtual mode, the access becomes all the more greater possibility, and everyone from within the country and outside the country can either join the lecture or even listen to the lecture in the proceedings a little later, because we will be having this lecture hosted on the YouTube channel of the university. So on this particular note, I once again thank the speaker, Professor Priyatosh Sharma, for having accepted the invitation of the UGC and also our university to deliver the lecture. Well, we initially wanted to host you, Professor Sharma, on campus for an in-person lecture, because I thought that along with my colleagues, it would be a distinct opportunity to have you spend some time with us and even to exchange notes and to know more about our university. But nonetheless, during the COVID and post-COVID times, we all learned to take advantage of the technology, and here we are having this opportunity to host you in a virtual space. But we look forward to having you with us in the near future on campus to engage with our faculty members of different schools of the university and also the students of the university. Before I proceed to introduce the university and the mission of the university and the School of Government and Public Policy, I would also like to thank the Dean of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, Professor Sudarshan, who unfortunately could not join us this afternoon, although he has been so very instrumental and at the forefront to convene this lecture, for having agreed to host the talk with the aid and support of his faculty members, Professor Geeta Sinha and Professor Shivangi. We are also joined by the Vice Dean of the school, Professor Naresh Singh, whom I understand is going to lead the proceedings this afternoon. and all the other faculty members of the School of Government and Public Policy and the administrators for having set up this lecture this afternoon. Be that as it may, what is more important is that this lecture is once again an opportunity for us to sort of value the symbiotic relationship between the university, which is the OP Jindal Global University, and universities both in India and abroad, because at the OP Jindal Global University, we always believe that we could foster a robust institutional framework to engage with the local, national, and global communities. And this has indeed been the hallmark of the JGU, which has been set up as a philanthropic endeavor by Mr. Naveen Jindal, our Honorable Chancellor, in the memory of his father, Shri O.P. Jindal, to ensure our mission as a research-intensive university. We are deeply committed to the core institutional values of interdisciplinary and innovative pedagogy, pluralism, rigorous scholarship, globalism, and international engagement across all the 12 schools and 3 research and capacity building institutes that we have at the OP Jindal Global University. Oh, there we have Professor Sudarshan, who just joined us. Maybe after my brief remarks, I will request Professor Sudarshan to share his reflections on this theme and the speaker whom we are hosting this afternoon. Talking about the university, we are to say that with all due immodesty, that JGU is one of the few universities in Asia that maintains a 1:9 faculty-student ratio and appoints faculty members from India and different parts of the world with outstanding academic qualifications and experience. The university is ranked amongst the top 300 universities in the world in faculty-student ratio, which is 1:9, and is ranked amongst the top 450 universities in the world in employer reputation. Over 60% faculty have qualifications from leading international universities. Approximately 45% of all faculty members are alumni of top 200 universities as per the QS and the Times Higher Education World University Rankings. The OP Jindal Global University is ranked amongst the top 500 universities in the world in international faculty, which makes up to 11% of JGU's total faculty. In the QS World University Rankings 2023, the OP Jindal Global University emerged as India's #1 private university for the 3rd year in a row. We are also ranked among the top 700 universities in the world. Further, we are happy to share that we have improved our global rankings for excellent faculty-student ratio, employer reputation, and international faculty ratio. In April 2022, we have become the first and the only private university to feature in Times Higher Education rankings for delivering the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The university has over 60 plus interdisciplinary research centers, and we have been granted with autonomy by the UGC and the then Ministry of HRD, as it was called earlier, Government of India, for receiving the then highest A grade from the National Assessment and Accreditation Council. This makes JGU the only private university in the state of Haryana and one of the only 2 private universities in India to be given the status of autonomy in 2020. The Ministry of Education of the Government of India recognized the OP Jindal Global University as an institution of eminence in 2020. With the confirmed status as an IOE, JGU has now entered a coveted group of only top 10 public and top 10 private institutions amongst the over 1,000 universities in the country to receive the special recognition from the Government of India. I'm also pleased to share that we are the first university in the state of Haryana to be recognized as an institution of eminence, which is incredibly a historic recognition for the OP Jindal Global University. We are particularly happy that the School of Government and Public Policy at the OP Jindal Global University is hosting the speaker on a theme which is so very pertinent community participation, as we all know, is a public process and it keeps decision makers accountable. Further, community at large deserves transparency over the decision-making processes, and they should feel that their inputs were also considered towards the larger goal of community development. In fact, the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy contributed to similar projects under the aegis of the Public Policy Action Workshop, be it activities like rejuvenating schools in the Jagdishpur village, or even conducting safety audits under the aegis of the PRIA, which is an organization, and the full form is Participatory Research in Asia, in addition to so many other initiatives that they have taken up ever since their inception in 2012. Therefore, on this particular note, the area of the work and the theme of the lecture is so much in consonance with the vision of the school, as the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy aims to promote research that facilitates a better understanding of governance and public policy issues. And different forms of community participation are appropriate under different circumstances, and we look forward to learn more from the speaker on the historical aspects of community participation and state participation, with a special reference to Punjab. On this particular note, I welcome the speaker once again, and we are indeed grateful to the UGC for having given us an opportunity to organize the lecture this afternoon. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Registrar Sridhar Patnaik. I'm very, very pleased to, as the Dean of this Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, host this lecture. But I have to say that, it's been done at short notice. We are doing this when students are having exams, but fortunately we can have a recording of the proceedings, which we could share with our students and other faculty who are invigilating as we speak. But we didn't want to lose the opportunity. We are grateful to the University Grants Commission for introducing to us Professor Priyatosh Sharma and suggesting that we schedule this lecture. And so as it is being recorded, it would be available to others when needed. And we will also organize a discussion. Now, if we were in a seminar room together, obviously the speaker's comments and observations will provoke a response, and people will make eye contact and come up with questions and comments. But in this impersonal mode, it serves some purpose, but it's not quite the same thing as an interpersonal exchange. And so at some point, I would invite you to make up for that and give us the benefit of your presence on the campus. We are all trying to conform to expectations of the UGC, which provided a date, and so we thought we could go ahead with this in this format, and so I'm very grateful. It's also it's not very common in the School of Government and Public Policy, which deals mostly with the social sciences, to have the benefit of a historian provide perspectives. Now, I've always believed that one of the most important disciplines for public policy is actually history. But it's difficult to, given the vastness of the subject, which is history, we need to do some thinking about what kind of history that has a relevance to understanding our public policy concerns of the present day. We do know there are large historical continuities. The British land reform land system, the governance of land and collection of land revenue, was taken from the system instituted by the Mughals. So there was a continuity. There's been a continuity of a kind in many ways. The decision to keep personal laws active and valid even after the constitution came into force with certain values, which were in conflict with some of the principles of personal law of the major religions of this country, was a conscious decision of our constitution makers. And that was a decision, again, which the British also had respected. In other words, they would want disputes to be settled in the realm of personal law, family matters, property, marriage, divorce, to give prominence to the laws governing the faith or the religions of the concerned population groups. And we are still aspiring to get a uniform civil code, which was placed in the directive principles by our constitution makers. So historical continuities are there at every turn, every time from our university. If you just stepped out of the back of our university, you will see a course minar, and that will remind you that it was a milestone for the Grand Trunk Road that went through all the way to Afghanistan. And that is the road which enabled a great deal of contact between Afghanistan, the Central Asian republics that are now there, and Persia, which is Iran. So these contacts, the flows of people, regiments, rulers, Isfahan, Nadir Shah, the Mughals, and the Mongols, Genghis Khan and his hordes that went to places like Herat and all the way to Hungary, and established what at one point was the largest empire in the world by using a fantastic, intelligent, strategic way of having two sets of horses and horsemen conduct battle, so that when the one lot were tired and the enemy was tired, you could launch upon a tired enemy a fresh set of horses with fresh soldiers, which was a strategy that worked brilliantly for the Mongols, who went through Iraq and all the way into Europe. So these are all what's happened, right? But all of these, this history of which Professor Priyatosh Sharma is an expert and has devoted a great deal of knowledge and scholarship, is obviously relevant to what we are doing in the here and now. It is just that we still have to configure our educational systems in such a way that in practically all things that we study, an element of history and kind of a not just broad history, but history that makes sense and is pertinent, should be brought in. And now, when the pandemic occurred and the epidemiologists advised a lockdown, I was struck by historically what had happened when there was the plague in Bombay. So when there was the plague in Bombay, the authorities laid on additional buses and trains and told the people, leave Bombay, decongest the city, right? Don't stay in Bombay because the plague is contagious. But that lesson that it's possible to, when the number of incidents of an infection like the coronavirus is small, it's possible to tell people to go away home to wherever, some relative, somewhere far away from where the epicenter of the infection is a historical lesson that we forgot. We could have done that. And if we had done that, we would not have witnessed the plight of migrant workers who didn't have a home and who are anxious to get home and be with their families. So our set of policymakers would have done well to have heeded to some history. What happened previously when there was a danger of this kind? So I think those are the insights that we need, and that we are now, there's a rich history in our country of the local standing up for the people in the community, and that the idea of some great, powerful sovereign at the top, calling the shots, as we may now witness in China after Mao, or in the Soviet Union with the leaders of the Bolshevik Party, or in Nazi Germany. All of that is highly improbable in our country, and for that we must thank our history. We must thank the fact that our people are conditioned to wanting to have a say over what happens in their backyards. What kind of school would their children go to? What kind of health services they should have? So that idea of self-governance. So you see, even Buddhism has contributed to that in our country, because one of the teachings of the Buddha is that you must first learn to govern yourself. And if you learn to govern yourself, you would be able to participate in a community so that the community can govern itself. But the first step is the individual must have a sense of self-responsibility and govern oneself. So these are ideas that we have had in our country, and we don't necessarily recognize why they are important for what is regarded as a very unlikely occurrence. When India became independent, the Churchill famously said, we are a geographic expression like the equator. We are not a nation. How do you expect this country to hold up? It will get balkanized and break up. It didn't happen. How do you expect a population that's mostly illiterate to be given universal adult franchise and be expected to play a part in choosing their rulers? That many people thought was unrealistic, wouldn't happen, and that democracy would founder in this country, but it hasn't. And so we must look to scholars like Professor Priyato Sharma to get an understanding of what is it in the DNA of this country and its people and its history that gives us confidence that we can continue to be a thriving democracy no matter all the evils of it. And also, not just take elections and periodic elections as the touchstone for democracy. The democracy is really in being in deliberation, in people being able to get together, meet. So the traditional systems in a village, so you can witness this outside our campus in Haryana. You have the Khap Panchayats that meet where people are able to, the punches are sitting under a tree at an elevation, but everyone is entitled to speak up. And people do speak up, and very vociferously too. The women speak up. You can witness this happening in this part of the country day in and day out in a way. You may question whether some of their values are the right ones, worry about what the Constitution and gender equality might have to say to them. But nonetheless, they have survived as an institution through millennia because they've served a useful purpose to the community. And that's a fact that you cannot contest. So I think a better understanding, a better knowledge of the kinds of institutions and impulses that helped our people come to where we are, we need a historian with the depth of Professor Priyato Sharma to throw some light on that. So with these words, I have to say we are very grateful. And this would be, in a way, a beginning where I think the School of Public Policy and all of the social sciences begin to incorporate history and take history more seriously than the silos of disciplines permit, right? We have to break through these silos. We have to become genuinely interdisciplinary. And if you were to do that, then, it's said that if you do not know history, you would be bound to repeat it, make mistakes that were made in the past. So I think we must learn from mistakes, what happened in the past, and make the present better and the future, of course, much more promising. So that continuum of understanding is needed in all that we do as a university that's committed to interdisciplinary learning. So with that outlook, I welcome you, Professor Sharma, to speak to us, and we'll record your talk, and we'll hope to have you over on a lovely campus and dialogue with you in person in the very near future. Thank you. You have to unmute.
So thank you, sir. First of all, my thanks are due to the whole university. And I am seeing Professor Patnaik, Professor Sudarshan, Dr. Sinha, who have spoken so many good words about me, and also the basic introduction. And they have, in fact, sir, they have opened up the arguments which I am going to forward in this present paper. Before going forward, because I hope to have an intense discussion and this interaction, because I am in an institute, I am in a school which is for government and public policies. So I should start with my postulates. What were the beginning, the basic questions which we were trying to answer through this whole endeavor, which ICHR, then UGC has came together, collaborated, and wanted to carry forward. The basic discussion was, because there was a discussion, there was some pointers which were even recorded and spoken at the public front. It was Bharat Loktantra ki Janani. So when you are saying this Bharat Loktantra ki Janani, then there is a discussion, because we are a society which always went for samvad. Samvad means if we go backward, our tradition is discussions. We discuss, we interact, we move forward. We take all the opinions and then keep moving forward. So in that samvad, when all the people, they came together and they thought, let us explore, let us understand what does that basic postulate entails. What is democracy? What is history, and what is Indian history? So there were basic arguments which were there, which were debated, whether it's history or whether it's itihas, because these two words have different connotations. Problem is this: many a times when we speak and we use English as a communication point, then the problem occurs. English had its own connotations which are very much clear to the audience which is trained in the English thinking. For example, going forward, I just tell you one interesting thing. That argument came forward when I use a word secular. Secular, it is not a debated word. Secularity has its own origin. It has its own genesis in Europe. It has a conflict against the church. There is a French Revolution. There is a proper evolution. There is a proper understanding through which this secularism has evolved. And that is why even after French Revolution, the question was whether we need God or not. Then God was dead after that 1789. But when we translated that word in Indian context, we use the word dharam nirpeksh. Dharam nirpeksh, it has its own connotations. Dharam and nirpeksh. When these two words came, it is neutrality towards dharma, not religion, because we use the word dharma. We were the people, we were the society which were sarv dharam sabhav. But we were told that you are dharam nirpeksh. That created a confusion. So if you are English educated, the secularity is not creating any problem. But if you are non-English speaker, if you are not trained in the English thinking, then dharam nirpeksh creates problem, because the very understanding of dharam nirpeksh. In the same way, when we use the word democracy, democracy had its genesis in Greece, that people, how the people would come together and the government of the people. But when we use the word, when I started exploring the word lok, what is lok? We use the word loktantra, but lok is not simply people. In Indian context, lok, it exists in two ways. There's a spatial, that you have a space. Then it is spiritual, it's a theological space, because we have patal lok, we have swarg lok, we have dharti, bhulok. Then lok, it is not simply people. It has its theological basis. It had its philosophical questions through which you understand this whole lok. The idea of lok in Indian context, the idea of lok in the idea of time, kal, in Indian context, the idea of participation in Indian context, the idea of dharma in Indian context, when these all came together, then the question was India a democracy? I would still debate the way when Henry Pirene, he was writing economic social history of Europe, medieval Europe, he said, if with these social revolutions which happened in 14th, 15th century, you want to trace the democracy of the modern times, you are bound to fail. But if you want how various sections were coming together and they were fighting for the power and they were forcing the state to listen, then you would find the genesis of revolution. Because revolution, democracy, government would have different connotations, different meaning in different spaces. It is not a universal ideal. It is a universal word I accept, but people would take it into different context. It is how organically people have evolved, how the cultural relativism has evolved. Without understanding the relativity of those people, you would not understand their sensibilities and how they want to participate. So with these questions, we entered into this question, this whole affair. What is democracy? That means I am using more like though it's democracy in English, but it's more like a loktantra, which I wanted to explore. Then how we recorded the history. There are facts there in our Itihasic tradition. When Romila, Professor Thapar said that there are various style of writing and recording the history. Sometimes your traditions, your stories, these all have their own meanings. Factuality, fine, you can debate. But then we have a very interesting question which remained in our sensibility even in modern time. When Mahatma Gandhi went on to talk with the people, what they would get after the exodus of the Britishers, what they are going to get. He answered Ram Rajya. What does that Ram Rajya meant? Why he used the word Ram? Because way back we have a story. We have a story in which when the wife, the virtue of the wife of king was questioned, king was forced to abandon her. Now we can question his integrity as a husband. We can question his integrity as a person, fine. But as a ruler, he was a father. He could not, in our tradition, a ruler cannot leave his praja, because in that case, his praja would be fatherless. And that is the greatest evil. The greatest responsibility of a ruler is towards one's praja, even if it meant the personal sufferings. That a ruler must be righteous. That is why we have Harishchandra, who was righteous. That is why we have so many Bhoj. These are all stories which we have records, which we have celebrated. When these stories are celebrated, when people in their anecdotes, when they go into public discourse, they use those examples. Who was Vikramaditya, who was a righteous person. Then even in medieval, when Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq questioned, there was an incident with Sheikh Nizamuddin Auliya. Sheikh Nizamuddin Auliya, who got money when Khusro, who was a usurper in the Delhi Sultanate, he distributed the money. When Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq came on the throne, he wanted that money back. So he questioned Sheikh Nizamuddin Auliya, who used to distribute the whole of money on every Friday. That money was distributed to the people on every Friday. He was questioned by the Sultan, how dare you spend the royal money? That money belonged to me. Sheikh answered, you are wrong. It is not your money. It is Baitul Mal. This exchequer is of public. You have no right on this money. That is what Sheikh said to the Sultan, and Sultan had to listen. Then there came another incident. These are the questions which we wanted to explore in this region. Then there came another incident when Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq was so angry at Sheikh Nizamuddin Auliya, he basically prohibited. There was a ban on Sama. There was a ban on Sama. That is Qawwali, religious singing at the Khankas of the Sufis. Then one day, which is recorded incident, that one Sheikh, he was Tsunami. Sheikh Tsunami wanted to listen to Qawwali. He invited the Qawwal and asked him, you sing that Sama into my ear. तो मेरे कमरे के अंदर आओ, and then you sing it to me. I will listen to it. छुप छुप के हम सुनेंगे इसको. So we will listen to it in hiding, because there is a ban on this by the state. When they went inside the house, he sang that some couplets in his ear. That saint went into trance, and the Qawwal also went into trance. They both came out. They started dancing. Then the whole street started dancing. Then there was a jalous, and that whole jalous went to the fort of the Sultan. Dancing, singing, they marched towards the Sultan, and Sultan asked, who are they? Then he was told, it is Sheikh Tsunami who is leading a procession. They all are singing because you have banned it. What Sultan did? He hosted the whole party for 3 days in his own fort. That was his response. That is how he was responding. That is how we have so many incidents in which normally what we say, we tend to think that king was or ruler was he was a benevolent. We refuse to understand how the communities, because these saints, these people, these communities, they were not some passive takers. We tend to think, normally in traditional history, we think like a ruler. But these communities, whenever they would feel anger, they would resist. These Sufis would show Jalal. These Naths would show their anger. These communities, they would burn their fields and they would went back to the forest and they will start fighting. We have numerous records. These people who were addressed, recorded as Jahil, Kafir, Gawar, who were they? Our question was, these were the communities which were fighting. They were not just the silent players in the whole scenario. They were, if you just go into their narratives, they were using the very word, it's a war, it's a battle, it's a war of dharma. Dharma yudh remained the basic principle. Then the second question for me was, what should be my area of interest? Being located in Northwest, then I have got the greatest scripture of this region, that is Shri Guru Granth Sahib. It is the, why I'm saying this, it's at the greatest scripture, because it remains the only scripture which had a composition from, in our context, Muslims, Hindus, Bhakts, Sikh Gurus, then upper castes, lower caste. The kind of conglomeration this whole scripture created, why it had its genesis in this region, why those gurus decided to enter and give space to each and every voice. Had it been the modern kind of a context or some other kind of religion, you would only give the space to the gurus, but gurus refused to do that. Then gurus added, they condemned invasions, they condemned rulers, they started creating the narrative. Who are the rare? They were saying कि जो राजा हैं, they are acting like a fence which is eating their own field. They started condemning Akbar. They started condemning the rulers, Hakims, Kotwals, Qazis. Everyone was condemned. Then my argument was this whole, and when we, that is the mic stop, when I halt the whole argument, Guru Granth Sahib had 1,000 years of evolution, the past, which you could reflect, which could you can see. For me, that remained one of the greatest document through which you can see the community participation, the interaction, the contestations, and also the resolutions. It is not a simple scripture of contestation. It is also, in our Indian context, if there is vivad, then there is also samvad. We do not go into vivad for the sake of vivad. We have vad, vivad, samvad. So that samvad was also given to this. For then, what it might seem a very good argument. Fine, we were given to democracy. We were part of the Loktantra, communities were there. But what can be our basic arguments? We need to have some facts. Without facts, it would remain an emotional outburst that we were Loktantric, people were very active. Then what I did in my whole paper, I added 3 main components. The first component for me was cities. For me, for a long time, cities have been studied merely as an economic areas of operations. We refuse to accept cities as a cultural nerve center of the whole civilization. Rural landscape participate, but it is the cities which you would see the real contestations. They would see the real resolutions. They will, if you see the Bhakti movement in the initial phase, you will see its location in cities. If you see Sufi movements in its initial phases, you will see its location in Lahore, Multan, big cities. So these cities are the place where varied elements came together. These cities for me were acting like a laboratories in which various sensibilities would come together and they would contest, interact, and then evolve. And that ideals were recorded. So for me, what I did in this whole region at the time, why I started with 600, because I made an entry point through Hyun Sang. Hyun Sang, when he visited this place, he gave a detailed record of these cities. So there were some important pointers, what he'd said. Hyun Sang said in his record, CUT, that these cities have local governments. They are more autonomous. Then to corroborate with this, I saw Chachnama. Chachnama, there are two incidents which were of more interest and which corroborated what Hyun Seng was saying. Hyun Seng was saying that these cities are autonomous, they do not have central authorities, the local people, the local structures, they were controlling it. That might have been just an observation of a foreigner. But do we have a corroborator? Then we had Chachnama. In Chachnama, when Debal was conquered by Muhammad bin Qasim, he was sent a letter by Dahir. What Dahir said? Dahir said, Prince Muhammad, you should not be very happy. This was a prosperous port city under the control of the merchants. I never stationed strong contingent in these port cities. When you would move forward, you will face my army. Now, the important question was, it was a prosperous city, it was a flourishing port. Why he did not station a strong army? Because that is now how the cities, the basic norms of the cities, how the various groups which were located in that, with best of time, under the Mughals, they became muhallas, and the foreigners, when they come, and the kind of trade which was there, we normally say laissez-faire. You would see more laissez-faire in these dialogues of these rulers. When I was exploring more, you will see, you just mark the course of the Muhammad bin Qasim. Cities were making contract, they were making pact with Muhammad bin Qasim on their own. If you just understand Muhammad bin Qasim, if you just see his march up to Multan, Muhammad bin Qasim was able to win the confidence of the cities. That is why Muhammad bin Qasim also undertook the census. He, many times when he conquered the cities, he gave a specific order to count the number of merchants and peasants. So he was continuously giving orders, once you capture a city, do not destroy it. When you capture a city, port, do not destroy it. When you compare that with Mahmud of Ghazna, he was giving an order of destruction because he wanted to destroy these port cities and want to bring trade inland. But Muhammad bin Qasim and the problem of Dahir to maintain the city, because we have also the record in Chachnama when Dahir and Chach were expanding and controlling these cities sent a letter to the ruler of Kashmir with the request that, now I'm quoting from that, the ruler of this region were not under control of one central authority. Chach and then Dahir were making an exception. So you must intervene and restore the earlier arrangement, that we are not under each other in that way, the way we see this in this, that is why once Romila Thapar, when she was there in Punjab History Conference, she said, we need to study this region in light of the idea of Jansanghas and how there was a collaborations among various parameters, and still this region is working like that only. That is why many times you could say this region cannot be tamed by the central authorities. So these various regions, these traditions, they are continuously moving forward. So if we move forward, if we just keep moving forward, then I give you one more incident. When under Nasiruddin Kawacha, this Multan, I'm talking about Multan now. There are three main cities which I made a specific subject of my study. That was Multan, the other was Lahore, and the third one was Delhi. So these three cities, I wanted to see how these three cities created the norms for the state. So when we see Multan, after the invasion of Muhammad bin Qasim, Multan remained under Islamic state. It from 712 onward, it was always under Islamic influence. It never came out of it. Only then when Maharaja Jeet Singh conquered Multan in 1880, then it came under Sikh influence, under Sikh state. So when you see Multan, there was a famous temple, Mulsthana, or the Sun Temple of Multan. Interestingly, despite all kind of hostility, whatever we may record in the normative literature, you know, when we see the normative literature, problem is this, we tend to agree with this, and the normative literature would say that there was destruction. I'm not ignoring that, but that Sun Temple was not touched for next 300 years. Because the Baldori and other Muslim scholars, how they would justify the presence of a non-Islamic temple in a very city of Islam. Now they need to give some argument because they could not touch it. And the practices and the rituals and everything was going on. And that was a phase when you start, if I agree to the Ganeshev's idea of passage from that, when you have an interaction between two different societies, you would have a fracture, because that fracture would open the spaces. Then you have fusion. Then you can create the new norm. But the initial phase is always a fracture, because without creating these fissures, how you would create new spaces? So if I agree to it, then even in its initial phase, the Islamic State was not able to touch the historical Sun Temple of Multan. For next 300 years, it continued to sustain this. It's on that very heartland of the Islamic State. The argument given was this. Now, how it was justified? Because we know the population was still not Muslim. So the argument was given, whenever the local rulers would invade Multan, the Islamic ruler would bring the idol outside and say, I would break it if you would invade. Then people would move backward. That is how they were trying to justify it. But we know you need the support of the people. You need the support of the classes. So if I say classes, but it's communities more. But if within 300 years, when the migration was now at a higher pace, when this place started showing tendency of Sufism, because Multan would then become the center of the Suravardis. So when you will see Multan as a Suravardi, near Multan, you will see Pakpatan, Chishti center. So when the religion would keep on, Multan would keep activated. Multan never went outside the influence, the socio-cultural influence of the region. So when Multan, these local rulers were confident enough that they could touch that temple without upsetting the communities, because you had more support from the ground, then in 10th century, the temple was broken down by the Karamatiyas. But by that time, you saw the emergence of Suravardis. Then you saw the emergence of, in Lahore, Al-Hujuri. Then you saw very soon near Multan, Pakpatan, the emergence of Chishtis. So the whole space which remained subaltern centric. Why I'm saying Suravardis? Because these were the only Suravardis. When Mongol invaded Multan, they gave money out of their personal pocket to the Mongol rulers, not to destroy the city. That is how he was considered the patron saint. You just imagine that time when invaders are moving inward, and you need a patron saint who could just negotiate and protect your city. So that city became a protection, that became a Valiyat, the spiritual territory of the Suravardis. And I have two incidents more. One incident, you just see how this whole city is coming forward. Then when Multan was under Nasiruddin Kawacha, then the spiritual saint of Sheikh Bahauddin Zakaria was the Sheikh of Suravardis in Multan. So he sent a Qazi with a letter to Iltutmish, the ruler of Delhi, to invade, to enter Multan, and he would open the gates, and the people of Multan would support the Delhi Sultanate. That is Iltutmish. The Qazi was intercepted. And when the local ruler, the Nasiruddin Kawacha, now you can see the beauty of the place, how the communities and cities were moving. The Nasiruddin Kawacha captured that Qazi, and Sheikh Bahauddin Zakaria was called for inquiry. He was questioned by the Sultan, did you send this letter and Qazi? Bahauddin Zakaria said, yes, I sent this letter and Qazi to Iltutmish to enter Multan and capture the city. Then Kawacha said, why did you do that? The answer was, because in the onslaught of Mongols, you were not powerful enough to support us. You cannot protect us. We as a city are not sure that as a ruler, you are strong enough to protect us. That is why we want that person who could come and rule over us and protect us. That is how these cities were moving forward. That is how they are coming forward. Again, when even in Delhi Sultanate, we have an incident of Sheikh Arif. That Sheikh Arif, who was the successor of Sheikh Bahauddin Zakaria, we have an incident, Prince Muhammad, who was the son of Balban. He was one of the most strongest person who was destined to be the next Sultan of Delhi. In his anger, because he was a person who was given to tend to be angry at the drop of the hat, he divorced his wife, who was a relative of Iltutmish. So when he divorced his wife, now he wanted to marry her again. So the question came that you have to marry your wife to someone else, then he would divorce her and you can remarry her. So Sheikh Arif was chosen. So Sheikh Arif married the wife of, the divorced wife of Muhammad. Then the wife requested the Sheikh not to divorce her because she wanted to be in that hospice and serve the Sheikh. She requested him not to divorce her, and Sheikh refused to divorce her. He offended the prince himself, who was so angry, who at that time mustered the largest contingent of his time. He was not able to get his wife back from Sheikh Arif because he knew that he was supported by that city. And when he died in the battle against the Mongol, the people of the city said, because that person offended the Sheikh itself, he was cursed. Saints were also used as the persons who could curse, Jalal. That is how Multan evolved. Then we have Lahore. When even Mahmud of Ghazni, when he conquered Lahore, and Lahore got a great amount of political patronage under the Ghaznavids, all the local Salars were the commanders. They were natives. They were not imported. Tilak, who was even a Hindu barber, they all were sent into this region, and these local people who had local alliances, and sometimes like Tilak, who came from the lower sections, they were given spaces so that those communities kept close to the state. State would never offend those sections जो उनके साथ लड़ रहे हैं, जो उनको contest कर सकते हैं. That is, even when you understand Britishers, you just understand one thing, that Britishers also got the support of those communities, which were for them, which were the nerve centers of the power. They gave them master status, whatever they did. But even they were not here as an absolute ruler. They continues to negotiate with the local communities, because it might be a little bit digression, that we do not, the communities never started asserting themselves in 1950 after the implementation of Indian constitutions. We were aware. We had histories of debates. So that is why you see Lahore, and again Delhi. When we study Delhi, I just give you one interesting example, because these are the pointers. When Qutbuddin Aibak as a sultan went to Delhi, he was opposed. He was sent back to Lahore. When his son Aram Shah was ascended the throne, again the people of Delhi refused to accept him. So we have, whenever the people of Delhi, they became so important that on this very argument, Muhammad Habib gave, though it is challenged by his own son Irfan Habib, but argument was this: when these cities, they had an opportunity to go against Delhi Sultanate, they do not went against them and supported the Mongols. That means these cities, these people of that city accepted the norms. When Razia asked for justice against Shah Turk, then city sided with her. When Alauddin Khalji killed his uncle and the Sultan, the city got angry. We had continuous presence of cities who were making themselves present, felt, otherwise even in contestation against the ruler. So these cities for me were, so I had just traced various incidents in which these cities were making their role. And from these cities, the cultural norms, the idea of state, the idea of contestations, the idea of dharma, whatever, they all were filtering down to the rural landscape. That came to my second objective. That was saint and mendicants. Dharma, for us, though we sometimes use the Hindu church or Indian church system in India, we were never given to one central structure. In Indian tradition, if you go deep, there are three basic parameters through which you can understand our religious life. One is scripture. We in Indic traditions accept scriptures. That is the one norm. A section, for example, if I say the priestly class, Shankaracharya, they would all accept the scriptures. The Brahmins or the priestly class, they adhere to scripture norms. The second one is monastery, which we say mutt. So second tradition is mutt tradition. So scripture tradition, second is mutt tradition. Then we enter into third tradition, which is studied not in that great context. That is popular. That is folk. Our religion, our dharma is not merely scripture. Our dharma is not merely mud. Our dharma is not merely customs and folk. It is the combination of these three. Many a time, a priest who is adept in the scripture, he would participate in the folk, where he would even understand the digressions. You go and study Uttarakhand's Pandavlila, you go and study the local traditions in which a Brahman would participate within the local norms. He would just participate. He is not the controller. He is not creating the norms. He is just wanting a share. I need to be, but he would never reject the local structures, the local traditions of religion in totality. He could not, he dare not, because he will not be accepted. So that is a phase, because thankfully we were not into social justice reform movement, which happened in the 19th century. Because I agree to the argument of sometime Eaton when he says these reforms then start eliminating all the various varied fusions, Indo-fusion traditions and syncretic traditions, and on the name of reforms, they are basically bringing the communities back to the political forms, the fundamentalism. Many times social justice reform would result in the emergence of rigidity and fundamentalism, which emerged post 20th century, when communities became more disconnected, the boundaries became more rigid. But thankfully, we in a time when that was not the norm. So people were free to move from one place to another place. They could have various multiple identities. That is why in 1891, when people were asked, who are you? They said, we are Hindu. And then they were asked, who you follow? They said, Sultani Peer. We are the followers of Peer. Then Britishers were confused. How can you be Hindu and follower of Peer? So in 1890, if you study this region, there was a continuous attack on the traditions of Peer. For me, who were these Peers? These Peers were not simply the way we see it right now, Muslims. Many times, Nath, Jogis, and various other elements, Kalandar, they all were brought together one cultural norm of Peer, specifically in this region. Why they were so important for me? For the arrival of the Islam, the emergence of Islamic in Western Asia, the movement of the emergence of the new region of consumption from China to Western Asia, when the Baghdad, Damascus, these all regions emerged, and Persian Gulf became more economic nerve center of the world, because the emergence of this Western Asia and the emergence of the Islamic State, the emergence of the main cities, and the highest level of consumption pattern in this region, if you study closely, it diverted the trade. Then cities were also facing the heat, and you will see from Buddhism, because when China, the movement was more towards China and Tibet, from Buddhism to the character of in these cities was started showing the character of Sufism. So for me, the less patronage to the Buddhist sites resulted in the decline of Buddhism in these urban centers, and these urban centers became more Islamic centers now, where you will see the emergence of silsilas. But at the same time, because the rising consumption pattern also created new economic dynamics in the rural landscape. So the rural landscape where the Jogis and Naths were moving, now you had a new structure. And this new structure is important for me because they were interacting, communicating, teaching in vernacular. Yogis and Naths were communicating in vernacular. And they were not, why they were famous? Because they understand medicines. They were in movement. They were knowledgeable persons. If we see them, Naths and Yogi places were also important because they could cure many diseases. That is their basic understanding. And they can move into those spaces which were otherwise not, you could not penetrate them, because there are digression from the established normative religion. You had to indulge in various things which might not be prescribed in the very religious normative structure. So Naths, Jogis, and Kalandars were allowed. When Bhu Kalandar was asked by Qazi that why you are not following the Shariat, he said ki I am the Mehboob of Allah. I am allowed. I am Kalandar. How can you stop me? So we have not studied these people to that detail, but they created a strong norm against the state. Such a strong against the state. Then I just quote you few lines. That is the composition of Bhartari. He said, I am quoting Bhartri now. It's a translation, though he said it in Hindi. We control the spirituality you worshipped by the rich and greedy. He's talking to that. He's saying that to the king. We control the spirituality. You are the worshipper of rich and greed. We are those who strive to remove illiteracy. तुम लालची और धम्बी हो, हम धर्म और अज्ञानता के खिलाफ हैं. Then he says, काजी और मुल्ला, तुम कुरान करते हो जिस तरह से ब्राह्मण वेद पढ़ता है, लेकिन हम ना ही तीर्थों के भुलेखे में रहते हैं, ना हम इन चीजों में पढ़ते हैं. हमें पता है तुम जिसको भगवान और तुम जिसको खुदा कहते हो, वो एक जोगी जो है, वो टाइमलेसनेस, वो एक बिंदु पे, वो एक शब्द पे ध्यान लगाता है, उसको ये ड्युअलिटी समझ नहीं आती. Then he says, ओ काजी, तुम्हें अगर पता होता पैगंबर ने लड़ाई कैसे लड़ी है, उसकी जिहाद तलवार नहीं था, कंपैशन थी. They started using these words, and if you study these Chogis Nath, they are still existing in your rural landscape. Still people go to those places. These places are still the healing places, and these are the places which could challenge the state. आपके पास, you would come across so many stories in which the curse of the Sufis, the curse of the Naths, the curse of the Jogis would destroy the state. You may not agree that in factuality, but that is how people were participating. These who were Satnamis, when they went against the Aurangzeb, and Aurangzeb had to march in person to control them. For 8 months, the mere agriculturists, the small peasants who were addressed as Kafir, Gawar, they took on the might of Mughals. And Aurangzeb had to move and write some ayahs from the Quran, so that there was an idea that these people had miraculous power, they would not be defeated. Who were Sikhs? Again, supported by the ideas of Gurus. Who were Marathas? Supported by the ideas of Varkaris. So you would have these mendicants, these saints, these people who gave voices. They were not simply the reciter of the outer word. They were reflecting the very norm of the state and why people should be given a voice. Either they were coming from the subalterns, they were questioning the norms, and they were accepted. They were adhered to. We have so many bhakts, we have so many naths. So that was my another idea, in which I give you one more example. Then I will move the third part. There was Sheikh Buddh. Just 2 examples to understand how they can contest. There was a person, Buddh, whose later name is Sheikh Buddh. He is considered a very enlightened persona. He was under the service of the Delhi Sultanate, and he used to measure the land. He was part of the land revenue measurement. He said, once he said, ki, I had a dream of Sheikh Arif, who said, Buddh, what you are doing? Why are you working for this state? Why are you working for this state and exploiting the people? He said, on the very next day, I left the job and went to the spiritual world. He left the job because he had a dream in which Sheikh Arif told him not to serve the state. When we have another person, Hamid, he said Sheikh Nizamuddin came into my dream and said, oh Hamid, what are you doing? Why are you working for this state, which is exploitative? Tu banda, wo gulam. Tu alimi, wo jahil. वो नलायक है, तुम पढ़े लिखे हो, तू आजाद है, तू हुर है, वो बंदा है, वो गुलाम है, और तू आजाद है, वो बंदे हैं, वो गुलाम है एक दूसरे के. तू पढ़ा लिखा है, वो जाहिल है, तुम इनके पास क्यों काम कर रहे हो? Why are you working under them? And he said, I left the job, I left the state. So we have incidents in which people the higher officials would leave the state just because they were instructed by the Sufis. They would had dreams in which they would start leaving the song. So that is how these things we need to understand. These are the spaces which would give voice, which would empower the people. I'm not saying people in that sense which we study in right now, Janta and public. I'm just saying the communities. So the third point which came to me about communities, while moving into the other areas, then I said, okay, let us see what are the basic communities. This earlier work was done by Irfan Habib on charts. Then we had a work by Surinder Singh, which his books came just now last year, about the emergence of this region. How those communities What he said, I start with that argument. He says we have three kinds of literature in this region. And I agree to that to a great extent. The first kind of literature, he says, it is by the state. It is state records. So we have tarikhs, Tarikh-e-Feroz Shahi, all the state chronicles, which was sponsored and patronized by the nobility and the state. That is the first form of literature. Then he said, second form of literature is hagiography, the religious writings. Then he said, what is the third kind of writing? Normally we use the word folk writings, but he says these folk writings are the writings of the rural aristocracy, the zamidars of this region. Who were these zamidars? Those were the zamidars which were now coming forward, those communities which were making state accept them and make them a stakeholder in their state formation. And who were they in this region? For me, it was Jats, maids, khokars. Unfortunately, before 1500 century, these people are recorded as Jahil, Kafir, Gawar. They are not given good words. But if we dig deep, you will see the kind of resources they had and kind of problem they created for the state. I will start with Jats. I will be in very brief. Jats, normally it is said that Jats were Shudra. I tend to disagree with this. Because they were, when Hyun Seng recorded them, he said they were not under anyone's control. They are very free-willed people. We just term them Shudra because they were not allowed to mount a horse in the city. For me, when they were controlling the horses, one of the strongest assets in medieval warfare, how can they be just the lower sections? They might be a tribal people. We have that tribe, just one precaution. When I use the tribe, it is not, in history, we have three phases, cities, and then we have forest, but in between we have peripheral region, the communities which could move to the city and also to the forest. So for me, Jats could also move into the city and they could also move back. So that is why you would see against Jats, Mahmud of Ghazni had to muster a contingent of boats that went up to 1500. They made life of Mahmud of Ghazni tough. They made the life of even Dahir tough. They even sometimes made the life of Muhammad bin Qasim tough. They were acting like those sections which would keep shifting their royalties as the need be. That means for me, that community was very much aware about the state formation. They were not some Shudra, the way we tend to think them. They resisted Mahmud of Ghazni, but when there was a revolt in Lahore and Tilak offered a reward of 5 lakhs, then they captured the rebel of the Ghaznivide state. Then they captured that person and handed him over to the Tilak. So they would keep shifting their identities, their loyalties, but this community was independent. It was very much present in the whole scenario. And that is how this structure, with the alliances of the Sufis and Mendicants and the Naths, who gave them space, voice in vernacular. When this community got a voice in vernacular through Sufis, through Naths, through Jogis, you would see their upward movement. I just give you one more example. How these communities, how failure and self-proud they were. Once Ghayathun Tughlaq, who was known as Ghazi Khan, he wanted to find a perfect wife for his brother, whose name was Rajab. At that time, Ghazi was the in charge. He was a Sepaslar, yani Iqtadar of this region. He was one of the most senior-most officer, more like a big commander under the Khaljis. So he wanted to find a wife for his brother, whose name was Rajab. He was told there is Rana Mal Bhatti of Abor, whose daughter is very good. You just send a proposal to a marriage to his daughter. You know what Rana Mal Bhatti said? He said, we do not marry our daughters to the Mongols or Malays. We would not marry you. He is one of the highest political noble. He is on the highest ladder of the politics, the power at that time. But he was refused by a mere Rana of Abor with the terminology that we do not marry our daughters to the Malays and Mongols. Then what Ghayathun Tughlaq did? He started demanding the revenue from Mansa. one revenue in advance. That created a problem for the local people there. And that was a region of the mother-in-law of the Rana Mal Bhatti. So she approached this person, Rana Mal Bhatti, and said, I am in distress. The daughter, when came to this idea, she said, okay, fine, I will marry Rajab. Tell the people that your daughter is kidnapped by the Mongol while fetching the water. So she went to the Rajab. And you know, she was the mother of future Firoz Shah. She was for her family, the Tughlaqs were Malay, not on the higher structure. But for the Tughlaqs, they were all respectful towards this community, which was located in this particular zone, which was under their control. So that is how you have to look at this whole scenario. Even Bhattis, when they were married with the Tughlaqs, they offered stiff resistance in this area. They never agreed to the Tughlaqs. Tughlaqs had to continuously engage against Bhattis who were fighting for their power. So these whole communities from Lahore to Multan to Abohar, they raised banners of revolts. And finally, they were accommodated. The same way we have Khokars. Jasrat Khokar, in the early 15th century, he captured almost Lahore, Multan. And how the records would notice him, many of us even would not understand who was Jasrat Khokar, but he controlled a powerful center of Punjab in the first half of 15th century. And how is recorded? The person who has led all the ruffians, madmen, gawar, classless people, uneducated people, now controlling the Punjab. That is how he was recorded in the state record. But for us, that is how communities asserted themselves. That is how Khokars asserted themselves and made the state accept. So all those people who are basically not given the proper title, epitaph in the narrative of the state record. But as Professor Surinder Singh says, we would use the same sources, and these gawars and educated buffoons who were recorded like this in those scriptures, in those royal records, we are bound to give them voice and tell the world that these were the sections who were fighting, not the passive speakers, and state could not just remain immune to them. Even when there was a chance of reconciliation, state was always happy to reconciliate. State was always happy to reconciliate with them. So for me, these communities who you would record continuously pose problem to the state, those urban centers who demanded righteous kind of government and autonomy, then those Naths, Yogis and Sufis who wanted reconciliation and proper deal for the people, for the communities. When they came three together and made state work according to the sensibilities, expectations of the people, then for me, it is a Loktantra. Loktantra in which whenever state is aggressive, whenever state is perceived as unrighteousness, this region would come together, communities would come together, and you would see them on the roads. So that is how I tend to think. For me, democracy, the way you want to see in a modern time, fine, there might be a debate. But if we see the Loktantra, in which this space and the ideas were making spaces for themselves, then yes, India had the tradition of Loktantra. We were fortunate enough. Democracy, the way it is perceived in modern senses, it has the past, it has evolution, the kind of spaces we tend to give to each other. It has a long history. And for that, we need to see cities, monasteries, rural setups, and then communities. With that, I rest my argument. These were my arguments which I wanted to discuss with you, and these were my postulates. With that, I once again thanks everyone for giving me a patient hearing. And I hope, because it is a preliminary kind of study right now, I'm moving forward in this. So all suggestions and comments are welcome.
Thank you very much, Professor Sharma. That was absolutely fascinating. While you were speaking, I was reminded of a book that my friend Shahid Amin published on Ghazi Mia, the warrior saint Bharej, who was, was martyred, but still, I mean, loved by everyone. I mean, regardless of whether they were Hindus or Muslims, and a whole lot of ballads and songs about him in the local community. And there's a narrative about how when he was about to get married, he left his phera because a woman said that her cow was in danger, and he dashed off to save the cow from whatever danger it was. So this kind of folklore about characters of this kind, and the bonding of communities, regardless of their primary faith, is fascinating about our country. The syncretism is absolutely amazing. I come from South India, and when the pilgrims go to the Sabarimala temple to worship Ayyappa, they have to stop and get the blessings of a Qazi who is there with an Al-Quran and a whisk. And they give him black pepper because that is what the Arabs came to Kerala to take as an offering. And then he is blessing them, and then they proceed to worship the Lord Ayyappa. So I think this kind of, this is our country, and the different communities have this. It's known that Tipu Sultan was attacking many temples, but he would never attack the Srirangapatna temple. And so I've learned that in the Biligiri Ranga hills, the tribals have a Shiva temple, but they call the Shiva temple Biligiri Ranga, the Ranga of the White Hills, because they said if we call our god Ranga, we are safe from Tipu Sultan's marauders, because he has a special relationship to the Srirangapatnam temple. So these are wonderful things that I think we need to document and understand, because in a way, underlying our superficial understanding of political scientists and what they talk about our democracy and so on, we have to get at the heart of it. What kind of people are we? What kind of people have we been? And what has been our relationship to authority, to state, to adharma, right? I mean, and so you see, people say, oh, Supreme Court of Justice, Supreme Court of India, but there's a popular conception of what is nyaya and what is anyaya, right? So that we need to get a handle on that, because our imported Western system of doing courts, people take other people to court to harass, not to settle a dispute. It is a mukaddama bazi is a sort of a hobby, right? You want to, no matter if I spend money, but I'm making the other guy suffer. And that kind of, so it caters to that, the modern court system. So we need to understand how, there were forms of justice. What did these institutions do? What were their norms and conceptions of what is right, what is wrong? I think we have to get at that. And so the work that you're doing is fascinating and contributes to a great deal, but we need to do much more in this direction. And therefore, this whole way by which in knowledge and intellectual resources have been colonized by the West, universities in the West, journals in the West, and what they wish to publish passes for knowledge. What they reject is, not known. I think we need to be a little more confident about our work, the kind of work that you're doing, and place a lot more emphasis on this, because that's the way we understand ourselves as a people in this country. And so I'm very grateful to you for a fascinating talk. I see that Professor Rajkumar has joined, the Vice Chancellor. I want to ask him if he'd like to say a few words. Raj, are you there? Did you listen? Well, that was a red herring. I think it's.
So by that time, I just want one input. The Conquest and Community by Shahid Amin is the book through which I entered this phase.
Oh, really? Oh, wonderful, right? Because it's not just history, because the sources that he draws upon, you see, most of it is vernacular. So, in our sort of universities with English medium, many people don't have access to the whole world of vernacular primary sources.
That is why in Lighter Vein we used to say, na, ki now we have judges, not Nyadhish.
Yes, right. That's right. Yeah. So it's been fascinating. I think I've just opened the floor for comments. We've just about come to the end of our scheduled time, but there may be some of my colleagues who wish to say something. Avinindra Thakur is my colleague.
So thank you very much. It was really fascinating. So actually, I'm curious about this identity of this lok, because you talked about Sufi yogis and all who, this kind of religious or somewhat, they already had a strong hold over society during the entire medieval period. So do you think that this lok, it means the community which had influence over the government or state, was largely religious during that time? How far do you think that the different economic communities like peasant laborers at that time, or maybe different kind of economic communities had also a voice or a kind of resistance power against the state? Because Sufi, the interaction was both ways. When Muslim rulers sometimes submitted to Sufis and all, the relationship were quite a two-way. So do you see this kind of relationship also there in the different economic communities?
Basically there are two postulates. The first one is lok. When I use the word lok, in Indian context, when we use the word lok, for me, I was exploring if lok is simply the people, then how can we have patal lok? How can we have tantra lok? How can we have, so that means what is lok? We do not simply understand philosophically lok is just not a region. It is not a space. It is it's a theological context also. For example, we cannot just look at it is there. But for example, Bhulok, it is there. We are the prani, we are the vasis of Bhulok. When then there is the devtas who live in the Swarglok. So the lok in itself, what does that lok meant? Lok is a perfect space which is even constructed in your mind. That lok, what is patal lok? It's a heinous place. What's a Bhulok? Where the people are striving for the salvation. What is Devlok? Where the righteousness lived. So for me, I wanted to see lok. What is lok? Now coming to the second assertion, how Sufis and how you understand this. The argument for me was this: it is not religion which was important for us. Religion was never important. We were more given to the dharmic traditions. And when we go to the dharmic tradition, it is not simply, when we understand religion, religion is a scriptural narrative. For example, there is the Old Testament, there is Quran, there is New Testament. So we can understand the basic precepts of the religion which is coming from these scriptures. But for me, many a time I would just question those very scriptures and refute them. Then what is my religion? Then for me, for example, I just give you 2-3 examples. In Pandharpur, when Vitthal came to saw a boy who was serving his parents and he wanted to meet him, he said, "Ki wait, I am serving my parents. I do not need you. Just wait for me." He made God wait for him because he was serving his parents. So God was so happy that he became Vitthal. It might be a assimilation of different kind. For me, that story means it is not a very much prescribed tradition which we are following. That is the first argument. So dharma would always control us. Dharma means what? We are pitra dharma. We have samaj ka dharma. We have as a dharma of a daughter, pati dharma, patni dharma. We would have dharmas who would keep contesting, assimilating, interacting with us. Now coming to the economic ideas. In Indian context, for me, when I go to traditions, not into simply Marxist perceptions, the way it is being perceived, for us, earth is one form. Earth, the mere attachment to the earth would bring the doom. We never accepted in our traditions. In ground reality, whatever it is, I'm saying the lok, when we are trying to create a lok, when we are trying to create that ideal world in which who would attach to simple earth, they would not succeed, but economy would always matter. So when we study urban center, if you study urban center, simply the people who were there economically, it is an economic zone. Fine, urban center is an economic zone. But economic center, urban center is not merely an economic zone, because when we see various communities who are trying to contest and find a space within the tradition. For example, I just give you 1-2 more examples to make things more clear. For example, Kabir, for example, Ravidas. Who are they? They are the byproducts of the economy of that time, in which various artisan communities were moving forward. So economy is there. But now what they are fighting for, how they are making space for themselves. There are 2 ways in which we can see. One is the contestations, in which you would contest and refute. The second is you will reformulate the whole idea. And the both ideas, the way we see dharma, the upper section and the lower section, the fighters and the victim, whatever you, how the have alls and have nots. If we see have and have nots, they would both open up. They would both open up and would create something else. That is why Ravidas in various traditions would even become a guru of the Rajputs. You know, in tradition, it is said that Rajputs had Ravidas as guru. So what I am pursuing is this: when we study this tradition, the whole tradition of community participation, it has 3 parameters. The biggest parameter was how the whole idea of state and righteousness and dharma was created in your mind, and then how it is being perceived in the world. And if it is not in conformation with your mind, in your perception as a community, whether you would be passive or whether you would be active. You would, in Indian context, we never saw the communities passive recipients. Nowadays, we see Bairagis as passive recipients, but William Finch has strongly studied how Bairagis, Gosai, they created armies. It is the Bairagis who created the state. No, you see the subaltern sections are there. Economy is changing. Islamic state is emerging. We are entering into medieval state. You need more and more warriors. Many a times it is Bairagis, Akhadas, Gosai who would prepare people for the warfare. They are the active constituents of the warfare. They are fighting for the state. Even they created the norms of various states. For example, Kullu. Kullu is being formed by the Bairagis. It is they who gave strength to the state. So for me, economy is there, but it will not create the perception of the perfect state for which you will fight. व्यापारी को व्यापार करना है, अगर वो मुगल ठीक करते तो ठीक है, लेकिन जब हम नॉर्म्स में आते हैं कि चाहिए क्या, तो आप उसको कैसे देखेंगे, कैसे समझेंगे कि जो हो रहा है वो धर्म है कि नहीं है. And finally, can we perceive our world the way we live in Indic tradition? Can we see our world without dharma? That is why I said na, ki when in the very beginning, when we use the word dharma nirpeksh, whole of India, half of India got confused. Ki we have dharmic, how can we be nirpeksh? Though it's a state, fine. Secularism is no problem, but dharma nirpeksh is a problem. For us, it was dharma sarv dharma sambhav. I am happy with my religion. I am happy with my dharma. You are happy with your dharma. We would come together, interact, and that is a perfect stage. That, as being told by the Professor Surshan, you are going to Sabramali temple. You would have Qazi on the way. You will have Qazi Masood, who the patron saint of Badayach. He is worshipped both by the Muslims as a jihadi who destroyed, as a Ghazi who destroyed the temple of Shiva, even when his head was beheaded, and also by the Hindus because he is considered the incarnation of Krishna. So he is both Krishna and a Ghazi at one place, and communities are coming together. They don't have any problem. For some, he is a Ghazi. For some, he is Krishna, and both are happy because तुम्हारा धर्म और मेरा धर्म इकट्ठा चल रहा है. So that is how we see.
Thank you. Subharan's got his hand up, I think.
Yeah. Thank you for your talk, Professor Sharma. I have just a quick question in the context of, let's say, recent times. If we get to see that in the very recent survey in UK, the number of Christians have gone down for the first time. It is no more the major religion, if you want to say the word religion. And at the same time, 37%, it is not even the Muslims, 37% is neither going in the world of, let's say, secularism or all religion. They are saying like that there is no God. So there is a new trend coming up. So in this, in the like rich, in the rich talk, how will you fit this recent phenomenon, very recent, where the survey was done only last month, and this is from an advanced economy where we are getting to see people are moving away from religion, not only non-religion. I don't have, they responded, 37% responded, we don't have any religion. So given this background of, let's say, very rich culture, religion and all, how do you think like this new result which has come out fit in? That's my very simple question out of curiosity.
So it's a very interesting thing. Now, the first argument is this: when we study the evolution of atheism, the atheist who say that we don't have a religion. So for that, again, I say the way it has evolved over a period of time in the Europe, where the church was all pervasive. Church had its own exploitative nature. I am not saying church in that way. I am not against church, but if you study church and ecclesiastical codes in the medieval time, the way it controlled your life and the kind of aggression Renaissance had against the church, but not against the God, but still the church. But church and God were closely aligned. So we see with passage of time, when your state, your structure, your whole norms are so strong that you do not, they have evolved in a different way, the way they post 1789. So in Europe, I understand, and most of the northern cities, northern regions, they are becoming atheist now. So they are saying we are not atheist. Fine, agree to this. And now coming to this, the basic question of Indic traditions, how we see this in India. Interestingly, if we go back and study historically in a very serious way, right from Buddhism to Jainism and various other traditions, even Adi Shankaracharya, they never agreed to God. In most of the Indian religions, God is absent. We do not have God. We never agreed. I told you right now, even yogis and Nath, they don't agree to God. There might be a Bindu, there might be a Dhvani, there might be a Om. For us, problem is the way we are seeing and confusing dharma with religiosity. Religiosity is, or religion is, a very specific kind of norms in which you have to follow a particular set of principles, gospels, injunctions. For example, if my scripture says, for my scripture says, suppose karo, if it's a Brahminical, some scripture which is prescribing the caste system, it says that there must be a caste system. I say I refuse to follow that scripture. I am not religious. I do not follow this. It is fine with me. It is how we were moving forward. That is why post 1871, when this census system started and people were numbered now, for next 30 years, if you just study 1871 to 1911, you would be surprised that census, every year population was increasing and decreasing. People were not even sure who are we. And in 1891, the local officers of Punjab said, we have to use our own mind because people are not sure what they are. Sometimes they say Hindu, sometimes they say Muslim, sometimes they say someone else. We are not even sure ki hai kya. Sometimes they would ask you, who are you? They will say Muslim. Do you perform namaz? Yes. On what day? Diwali. They would answer this. If you see 1891 census, in the temple of Jwala, the temple of Kangra, Brajeshwari, there is a record of Bhojkis. Bhojkis are the ritual performers of the daily yajna. जो देवी की आरती करते हैं, the one who serve the devi, the deity, वहां पे Brajeshwari में, the temple of Kangra, the Brajeshwari Devi, they are called Bhojkis. The Bhojkis. I am not surely about the exact numbers. Then you will see the list of the Bhojkis. They will say this many are Hindu and this many are Sikh. Sikh Bhojkis are recorded in 1891 in the temple of Brajeshwari. In 1911, then there would remain only Hindu. Uske baad aapko Sikh nahi milenge. People would be settled down. People would be made aware ki what is your religion. We people never understood what is religion. If you go into medieval sources, no medieval native source address अपने आप को इस तरह से जिस तरह से आज हम देख रहे हैं. That is why even this book is not studied to a great extent, but somehow it can be used to some extent if we want to even criticize it. The essential of Hindutva, when we read it, then V.D. Savarkar said, when we erroneously equated Hinduism with a particular kind of religion and made the maths, the sects, a Hindu and other people outside that sect, non-Hindus, which was done by the Britishers, we did a great injustice because we never agreed to this idea. This idea of religion, the way it is conceived in modern time, it's flawed. And especially for these traditions. If you ask me, I am religious, I will say no. But you will ask me, I am dharmic, I will say yes. That is the thing. So we never got upset with this idea. When Shankaracharya came and said that God is just an illusion and you are yourself a Shiva, we said, okay, fine. He's saying something good. We have a story now, but there's a very interesting story. When Adi Shankaracharya was moving forward, there came a person from the lower section who was he was working in the cremation ground. वो सामने आता है उनके, and someone says कि you are नीचे वाला charge हो, तुम side पे हो जाओ, हट जाओ. So he said that person who is considered the lowest of low, and he is before Shankaracharya. That story says, then he asked Shankaracharya, from who you want to escape? From you? From me? From whom? If you are you and me, then what is Advait? If there is Advait, then why I am not you and why you are not me? So tell me from whom you want to escape. Then Shankaracharya bowed before him and said, you have taught me the right thing. I salute you. For us, that is what it was. So right now, the more religious we are becoming, the more touchy we are becoming. We just want our numbers. We were never after any numbers. We were never worried about numbers. We just want people to be righteous in their conduct. That is how we are. So I think it is good if we have less religious, if we keep reducing our numbers and become more dharmic.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Anybody else? I think I'll have to ask Shivangi to say a few words of thanks to everyone who's made this possible. Is this? Yeah, Shivangi, over to you.
So.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Hello, everybody. So yeah, Professor Sharma, great talk. Great to have you here with us. And I don't think there's anything left for me to add over here. Once, our Dean Sudarshan has spoken, and, such nice way of, concluding everything. So I'll just want to quickly thank the UGC Grants Commission for organizing a talk, broadly lectured on India being the mother of democracy. I'll also like to convey my thanks to Professor Professor Priyatosh Sharma for being here. Sorry, I think I know somebody.
So it's fine with me. Every name is fine.
Which is why the slip of tongue is happening. I apologize. So I'll also thank you for your talk on state formation in the context of Punjab and how community participation was key here. And it was fascinating to hear about the beginnings of democratic processes in India that early on. And I would also like to join my colleagues at JSGP in thanking Professor Patnaik, our JGU registrar, who has been kind enough to give the welcome address and introduce the speaker. And last but not the least, our Dean Sudarshan for introducing and for conveying the proceedings of this session. And to everybody who was here, it was great to have Professor Sharma with us and the rest of the colleagues. And I hope everybody will eventually have access to the recording and will. And in case, and in case if they have more questions, they can. I'm hoping Professor Sharma would be kind enough to answer them over emails and what else.
Fine with me. I'm always open to the suggestions.
Okay, thank you once again.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, definitely. I was having one thing, but I will definitely ask you.
Please.
Go ahead, Sharik.
Sharik, I think we can. Take one more question.
Yeah, it's
informal. No, I don't have any question. I just wanted to thank him because of the very illuminating nature of his talk and how it has conducted from 600 to 1400 and then till now. So it was really very illuminating, and the way he has brought some novel concept deduced from these findings. So I'm extremely happy to be a part of this. And I just wanted to add, like our Dean has said and Professor already had said, yeah. So it was like like we have in Indian system, sometimes we see the stories and narratives like nursing avatar. So it was like sometime we deduce a lot of things from these stories, we learned some morals. But coming back to your point that like we don't believe in religion, but then it was with Prahlad and Hiranyakashipu, it was telling a different type of thing. So I was a bit slightly confused. So whether we should be moving towards it, or we should be adhering with what you said, because what you said, it is really very compatible and is the demand of art. So like our dean has said, for you, your religion, for me, my religion, and that's what it has been pointed out in Quran as well, like lakum dinukum waliyadin. It is like Sarvdham Sambhav in Sanskrit. So basically internally, if we see the basic similarity is the structure of Advait Vedantism, it's much more, there are much more similarity than the differences. Sometimes there are differences that are political in nature, like we see the evolution of economy and interference of politics. And as you have quoted about Aurangzeb, and then there was a Sufi saint, Sarmad from Armenia or Persia, and then there was a conflict with him. So, right, I definitely recognize these things, but just there was a slight confusion with that context of that Hiranyakashipu story. And then because I have known about the Charvak philosophy as well, but then again, we have conflicting things. So how to manage between these things?
So best thing in a very short Hiranyakashipu and Prahlad story, the very idea is this: ki the religion of a father would not be accepted by the son if he does not agree to.
Okay.
So even father has no right to force; he cannot force a religion
Exactly.
of his on his son. It is adharmic. A son would find it's his own.
So there should be a switchik and
yeah,
And
well,
if-
you set the stage for the next dialogue that we have to have with Professor Sharma when we invite him to our campus. Incidentally, I wanted to say that we have in the Public Policy School a research center, which has this extraordinary name. It's called the Center for Complexity Economics, which means it focuses on economics that's inspired by quantum physics rather than Newtonian mechanics. And then the next phrase in the center is applied spirituality and public policy, right? Because you see, even though seemingly they seem disparate, understanding of, all the great physicists were concerned about consciousness, trying to understand where is consciousness? Is it there in, physically in the brain? Is it somewhere else? What is it, right? And so, and naturally, these are thinkers who are not religious. I mean, it's not religiosity that matters, it's spirituality. But we added the adverb applied because we want spirituality to inform public policy somehow, right? Because in all the development literature and so on, something that matters to ordinary people, faith, spirituality, understanding of dharma and adharma, it doesn't feature in the discourse. And so we are making a conscious effort to try to do that. And, we'll invite you to join our Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality and Public Policy. And I say this on behalf of the director of that center, Professor Naresh Singh. He's from Guyana. He's a Canadian citizen. And in Guyana, he grew up with a Arya Samaj background. But, he's served for many, many years in the UNDP and also in the government of Canada. And he's now with us. And we want to explore a research agenda that I think you will find congenial to your interests and the overall objective of creating a society where there is shanti and harmony. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you for such a...
Thank you.
Thank you. We take leave.
So once again, thanks to everyone for giving me such a patient hearing.
Thank you.